What makes something nostalgic is when something has a strong impact on you, right? It triggers a lot of feels in you. It could be the presentation of the thing. It could be the story behind it, the lore behind it. Or it could be just eye candy, something that's visually very effective on you at that moment. So that's the thing with nostalgia. But can nostalgia be destroyed within you? I say yes. It can be lessened, but it's not a quick effect. I like to do that, right? Bring things from nostalgia and just experience in an old cartoon or something. The more you do that and the more common it becomes, the weaker it becomes of an effect on you, right? And sometimes you forget that it was ever nostalgic for you when you've had that recurring too much, unless you got it as a collector piece for that reason initially. So that's the interesting thing with nostalgia is you can create new nostalgia and you can willingly get rid of that feeling as well by repetition, via repetition. With that, I'm going to share monsters that are nostalgic to me, and you will see just how much impact monsters have in our nostalgic memory, at least for me, because you can think, yeah, I have a lot of nostalgia, but it's not necessarily there's monsters in it. But I beg to differ, even in your case out there, viewer, monsterette, new viewer, that you probably do have monsters of nostalgia that have impacted you as well. A huge one for me, and now it's making a lot of noise these days, of course, Masters of the Universe. You see, I grew up at these times, these cartoons that affect when he says, I have the power, and you hear the reverberance of the shimmer from the sword. Such awesome, impactful sound effects, so 80s. This was the influence of the time. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Conan, buffness that was getting hot at the time. Steroids were getting hot.
It was hype, pure undiluted hype.
Also, some of the strongest nostalgic impacts of Masters of the Universe is the typography. This is where it's so important for you graphic designers and designers. That typography on the top there, the title, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, those words, that was maybe more nostalgic than everything else He-Man to me. Okay, my next one is going to be Critters. If I see that title, the original VHS cover, like this image, and just the whole design, the red eyes, very impactful, very nostalgic, good old Critters. Speaking earlier of steroids and buffliness, and that was the era, right? Conan. We can all probably agree as adults, Conan the Barbarian was the better movie. But as far as feels, Conan the Destroyer is probably among the top. Well, it is among the top. Everything here is among the top for me. Just the intro of the movie, the drums beating, the riders coming in on horses, and Conan praying on his sword to Crom at the start of the movie, shimmering with his tan skin in the sun's heat. Just that scene and the music was intense. And then this monster, it might be cringy now. Now, this is a lizard that turned into the monster, so you still have his human pigmentation that remains. So that's not like a cheap effect thing. It's because he was a hybrid, right? He transformed himself into this monster. Nowadays, looking back at this, the jaw doesn't move. The practical effects were limited there. But this image, this monster was so nostalgic for me. Why this specific character? But it makes sense because it was the environment it's in. It had a strong red color of the cape, which hits the memory very well. As a kid, just seeing this creature and the dark skin and contrasting with the red, I think it had a lot of things that appeal to your memory banks. At the time, the Bruce Lee movie was also big, where Bruce Lee destroyed mirrors to get at the foe, the enemy. And the same thing happened in this movie. So Conan and Bruce Lee at the time and all that manly, time of the 80s, that's what happened there. Great soundtrack there on Conan. Raptor says, oh yes, the soundtrack. The soundtrack is amazing because you got the drums at the beginning. If you are watching this right now, you guys need to write this down on a piece of paper. Next time I watch Conan the Destroyer, pay attention to the music, and particularly in this fight scene. Just everywhere. Going into the ice castle, the music changes into this magical music, and some excellent scenes. Okay, where else have you seen this? A dual-wielding Arnold with an axe and a sword. If this doesn't sell you, nothing else.
That is the money shot right there.
But he just jumps down and he's fighting a huge monster, which is Lovecraftian. It's Dagon, because of course Robert E. Howard and Lovecraft, they collaborated. And then this was right at the ending, the movie ends, and then out of darkness it it shows Conan as king. And as a child, that impacted me so much. And so I always thought if Arnold comes back and does a new Conan, the scene is set for him. The lore is there. On from Masters of the Universe, of course, we had Thundercats. Now, Thundercats were somewhat nostalgic. It wasn't as strong for me as a kid as Masters of the Universe, but Mumbra was, because Mumbra looked like this unattainable toy that I saw somewhere, but I couldn't get. Bigger than the other toys. And he was just a cool antagonist. And you can see that now with the more modernized and, better art and stuff. He had this old version, old man, old weak version of himself, and then he turned into this powerful beast of a person. If this hits nostalgia or anybody knows what this is, then huzzah to you, because what this is, I never watched it, but when I saw this on Google, I'm like, I remember this. So this is a Beauty and the Beast TV series. And the beauty of it is, look who's there. We got Linda Hamilton, the actress of Terminator. The Beast, him, is Ron Perlman. It's Hellboy.
No.
Okay, next. This was a clever British claymation show that's like very adult and kid-friendly. You had this main character, you had the skull, I think he was the smart one kind of, and then the master that was underground in that trapdoor, and he would always boss him around and tell him to do stuff. The trapdoor, if anybody can relate, huzzah to you.
See, this is classic.
Yep, we had Legend mentioned. And yes, Legend and Dark Crystal, see that's the cool thing with fantasy in the 80s. You had a lot of dark fantasy. And in a way, Lord of the Rings is kind of also a dark journey. Come to think of it, a lot of fantasy is dark, because even Harry Potter goes in the dark areas. That movie, the song to that movie, the characters, the monsters in it are nostalgia. The dragon, the rock giant, the snail, the super fast snail. Gummy bears, hey, they're not just candy. They were a wonderful cartoon as well. That was the time of wholesome cartoons. That was Gummy Bears, that was David the Gnome. Shout out to those. Moving on from Gummy Bears, it's dinosaurs, how they were depicted in the 80s, early 90s. I feel that very nostalgic. And this is an actual book that I owned. The imagery of what we knew of dinosaurs back then and how they were depicted, that can be very nostalgic. So for me, it was.
Oh, absolutely. I remember having tons of encyclopedias about like prehistoric stuff and dinosaurs in particular.
Another one. This is one that's nostalgic when I see it on the internet. I don't think I've watched the movie. It's called Enemy Mine. I don't know. I see this on the internet and I remember seeing this somewhere on the TV. I don't know anything more about it, but it hits nostalgia feels for me. And just take a look at that. The practical effects on this are awesome. I need to watch this movie. Maybe I've seen it, maybe not, but I need to watch it. So Superman and all those colors, and I'm sure many people can relate to the colors and superheroes such as Batman also of our nostalgic memories as one of my favorite horror flicks that nobody knows about, and it's very good in some factors. And this was a movie about, it's a snake type of horror, but it's a scientist, I believe, that changes people into snakes. And actually it was kind of horrific. If you think about the werewolf transformation thing, one of the more nostalgic points of this movie for me was one of the horrific scenes, and it is this one.
Ooh.
And you see the person slowly changing into a snake. As a kid, you can imagine that was a bit impactful, and I do recommend you hunt this movie down. This has to hit the nostalgia vibes in anybody that's an 80s kid, and this is Short Circuit, robot movie where the military created robots. Very in tune with real life, right? What's going on? So one of them escaped, but it was kind of, it had a better, more developed personality and all that, and you can, assume the rest of the movie. I gotta mention Casper. So at this point in my nostalgia, we're moving from 80s to about the 90s. So now my newer nostalgia. So hopefully you guys, more of the viewers, will be on the same track of nostalgia at me here. So Casper, the Friendly Ghost, is both. Because Casper, they were old comic books. There was a little devil that looked like this too, with little horns, and they had a lot of these comic books, very nostalgic. And then in the early 90s, I believe, they came out with the movie of Casper, and it's a pretty charming little flick. Before the Ninja Turtles, I had mostly He-Man toys. I had a lot of He-Man action figures, right? But the Ninja Turtles, I didn't watch the cartoon much at that that age. But I did have my favorite, Leonardo, and I remember seeing how cool the design was with it because all the Masters of the Universe could just move the whole arm or the whole leg, but they couldn't bend the leg or the arm. When Ninja Turtles came out, they had rotatable forearms. And I remember just thinking how cool, like how modern this is of a toy. And then I gotta shout out the movie. So the movie is very nostalgic, I think, because they were entire body costumes. The practical effects, you don't see that done to this level. Now movies will venture into making cartoon characters real life because they do it with CGI. But to do it with practical was always really hard, so nobody did it. And they ventured and they made these whole body suits. Okay, Marvel cards. This was big for me in middle school. I think they still sell them, but they're not a big going on thing. A monster in my pocket. 90s kids will totally feel me on these. These were like cheaper miniatures, but like little gummy, rubbery plastic miniatures, but they had all the monsters you love. And the container was this cool triangular case where you can buy a bunch of them. Just collectible, little fun, playable, hard to break, tough, durable miniature monsters. So huzzah to that. Dinosaurs. This is a little later. It was basically The Simpsons. Dinosaurs were interesting, but didn't like the end of the series. That's what I've heard. I believe I had a lunchbox that had the dinosaurs on it. Okay, next. What was nostalgic at that point too in the early 90s? McDonald's. And McDonald's had their Happy Meals with their little toys. Oh, I think I know who I had. I had the one on the motorcycle, the red motorcycle.
Nice.
I looked up for images of this guy, and I found out that the actor that acted, and I knew this, I forgot, that acted the Moon Guy was Doug Jones, who is our beloved Abe from Hellboy, a fan-beloved guy at conventions because he's always open to taking pictures. He did Pale Man in Pan's Labyrinth and Fawn in that movie. So that's Doug Jones right there, young, and he acted the Moon Guy, which was another nostalgia to me. All right, Chris, the next one I know hits you.
I'm not thinking. That's Gordon M. Shamway Bluff.
I love that you just randomly remember.
I never forgot his name.
Alf, and I shouted him out recently. Very nostalgic during that time of the early 90s. It's something that you might have seen as a kid and just remember that face and then don't see it for years. And I'm like, I remember there was something like that, some ugly looking alien thing, but then it gets charming in the show. Good stuff. Okay, here's a big one for me. My introduction to the tabletop world. This, when I unpacked it under the Christmas soft lights in the house in the darkness, and you got all these, because this game didn't feel like kid friendly. It wasn't like for children. It wasn't like Monster in My Pocket and colorful. This look, look at that cover.
I do believe that was supposed to be Conan, I guess, because it definitely reminds me of his look from the comics.
For sure, it's very inspired, yes, because you play as a barbarian, a generic barbarian, but obviously we can see the influence with the black hair. When I opened this up and saw the miniatures, this game is one of the biggest nostalgic influence on me in gaming and everything, and a lot of people have a huge love for this. And like I was saying with Masters of the Universe, remember that typography? See, it was that powerful, very masculine, rocky, just hardcore typography, and that really hit it in nostalgia from early 90s, mid 80s, later 80s. So anytime I see this, even right now, I'm feeling those nostalgia, even though I've seen this many times. They Live. People don't talk enough about They Live. I've talked about it for many, many, many years now, especially even before the conspiracy stuff related to it. And this is a movie that I probably showcase the most when I have a new friend or somebody over. Now, we did speak of miniatures. Warhammer is actually quite nostalgic for me. What's nostalgic with Warhammer for me is look at this image, and what you won't see with new Warhammer is that every base is painted green with grass. That was the thing in old Hammer, and it was so pleasant, a good feel, when you saw this hobby. I didn't get into D&D much. I didn't have those kind of friends or that background. That's why this is very nostalgic, because you have new things. Even the Gene Stealers, the monsters in the back, they're relatable now. We still see them, but the paint was different. Display vibes were different. Everything was different.
Terminator franchise, I'm guessing?
Terminator 2, toys. So I had the T-1000, just the skeleton, the machine itself, right there in the middle and the top. Again, feels Terminator, bad to the bone. And also during that era, a little afterward, the Alien toys. Now this image is wonderful because this one shows the first models, the older Kenner ones, and the newer remakes, the NECA ones behind them. So I'm not talking about the newer ones, although that might ring your bells out there. This had the highest impact in me of nostalgia out of anything so far. It's not that old. old. It's not like Masters of the Universe. This is late 90s. But of course, the first game that really made first person online world a reality, and that was EverQuest. And I will never forget this box and the feels, the music. EverQuest did amazing things. You guys might not be able to relate to this, but you can relate to that special game in your life, especially online, where it did something that other games maybe didn't. The thing is, when you're that young and you look at the cover and you see this open world behind, and then you realize that all these characters on the cover art are characters you can play, and then this world you can explore, just like in this painting. I mean, EverQuest, the music, the art, everything EverQuest did was extremely impactful. I remember running for hours there, or for going on a ship somewhere, dying, falling off the ship, trying to get that body. Huge nostalgia. My first character I ever made was hard to play. It was a shaman, I think, troll. And as trolls, our starting realm biome was the swamp. And you'd run around this dark swamp, and I would see these guys. So I'd be this big troll, and then and these guys were like, 7 feet tall, right? So if you compare, they'd be just kind of gliding, just happily like moving like that through the forest. But they were killer, and they weren't that high of a level. They were like level 15, but I was like level 5. So to me, they were like a scary thing. And whenever I'd see one, I'd be like running them in the forest. Yeah, this is fun. I could do whatever I want. Oh shit. And then this thing, like, it's just gliding there, and it's gonna kick your ass in like one punch. So shout out to these. Shout out to EverQuest. And you know what this comes down to? This conclusion of everything? The biggest impacts of my life in terms of gaming are by far HeroQuest, and as far as video gaming is EverQuest. So the quests. So now, folks, if you think monsters haven't impacted your childhood, think again, because a lot of people out there, I can bet, were impacted within their nostalgia from some sort of monster, whether it's in a cartoon or something else, some sort of mythical creature. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for the support. Chris, it's all yours.
Well, we are positively charmed to have been able to spend the fine evening with you guys, and down memory lane. Hopefully the heartstrings were not tugged too harshly, and we'll be looking forward to some spraining of the mental faculties next time as we delve into the next topic.